Good morning, John. Good morning, Carol. Hope you got some good rest last night. Yeah, I did the opposite of that. I stayed up probably later than I should have, but this has been such a fun conference, like just being able to hang out with folks. Oh, we'll give everybody a few minutes to get in here. It's not even 9 yet, is it? Nope, still got a few minutes anyway, so. Yep. Agree. I'm gonna test my slides real quick. Let me know if you guys can see this opening slide. Awesome. Cool. We'll just wait till we get a few more in. Good morning, Kathy. Internet working a little bit better today? Good. Oh, that's awful. We had a storm here because it would have been Friday night. And I went outside yesterday and a tree had actually fallen on one of my neighbor's cars, which was not good. Not a large tree, but large enough to make a difference. And that was not fun to see. Okay, we're just going to wait a couple more minutes. Folks are coming from other sessions, and this is an early session depending on where you're at in the US. So good morning, Kenya. Oh, that sounds really cool, Carol. well, I hope that everybody will get a little something out of this session at least. So, um, having a few folks cycle in, which is good. I'll give it another minute or so. We've got a fair amount of stuff to cover. So, thanks, Kenya. This is usually how I start my day off, even at the office, and then it's eventually taken down out of the ponytail because it's a lot. So, hi, Sally. Awesome. Well, I'm excited. Yes, that sounds awesome. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started because I don't want to wait too long. I've got a lot to cover. Let me share my screen again. Everybody should see the slides. So, welcome everyone to Tackling Social Justice in Science Fiction. This is a workshop that I'm really excited about. Kind of my passions revolve around diversity and social justice. So, being able to present on both of those during this weekend has been a lot of fun. Let's see, why is it not advancing? That's why. Okay, cool. So a little bit about me. Got my MFA at Seton Hill. I think I've met most of you through Seton Hill, actually, or at least during this conference, which has been a lot of fun. I'm also an assistant dean at Washington University in St. Louis with our McKelvey School of Engineering. And I work primarily, my portfolio is with support for low income, first generation, underrepresented minorities. Three identities that I held during my undergraduate career. And that I feel really passionate about making sure they get to college and through college as a little bit, just a taste of the kind of social justice stuff I'm trying to do. Trying to bring more equity to the workforce, to engineering, to just being college educated, that kind of thing. But my real passion is teaching. And so I'm an instructor at our university college, which is our school for continuing education. I get the pleasure of teaching adults, most of whom are older than me, which is always kind of intimidating, but a lot of fun. Brings some really good conversations to the room. And I just wrapped up this past semester was a kind of the inspiration for this workshop was a 15-week class on social justice in science fiction. And so I'm going to do my best to compress an entire semester's worth of material down into this 50 minutes. So we're going to move kind of quick. I will throw some questions out at you guys. Hopefully, if I'm not covering what you want, please ask. I'm a firm believer that if you have a question, let me know. Because that's the best way for me to kind of tailor this to what you all need in the room. So, and honestly, this is kind of weird not being able to see you because I'm so used to that. So please engage in the chat. If you want to pop your head in and say something with your video on, more than welcome to do that. I'm not upset by that at all. I think that's the best way to learn. So, let's start with a question that I actually have for you all. And Carol, you kind of answered this, but what social justice themes are you all passionate about and would want to tackle in your own fiction? So this is kind of our opening kind of icebreaker question. Feel free to post that in the chat if you like. Transgender rights, great. Equity, absolutely. And equality among all races, good. Women's rights, yes, absolutely. Climate change, women's rights, student equity, yes, wonderful. Child abuse, yeah. And any others? Free education, yes. And that'd just be lovely, wouldn't it? Healthcare, yes, and access to healthcare. I love that one. So feel free to keep posting any others if you have them. Not exploiting. Wow, that one hits a little too close to home there, Kathy. So thanks. Not exploiting adjunct professors. Absolutely. So as we can see from the chat over here, lots of issues out there as it relates to society and ways to improve the world around us. Freedom from religion. I like that. And hopefully through today's presentation, I'm going to give you a few tools, or at least a few things to think about as you intentionally address whatever social justice issue it is in the story that you're writing. It can be a short story, it can be flash fiction, it can be novella, novel, whatever. But I want you to be able to walk into that or to sit down at that and intentionally write some social justice in there. Okay, to intentionally address that in your fiction in a way that will hopefully evoke some kind of change in your readers. Right? Because to be quite honest, we can write about this all day, but if we can't get the reader to change their thinking and the way they interact with the world around them, the way they vote, the way they protest, everything, then we're just writing a story that doesn't really make a difference. And so that's what I really want us to think about here, is how our stories can in turn create social movement, can shift entire generations of thinking, and that we can harness a little bit of that power, channel it in such a way to get your reader thinking and feeling. Because again, I think we elicit the most change when we get our readers to feel something, and that's why horror and romance work so well, because they get the readers to feel something. Social justice texts can do that just as well. And so let's dig a little deeper into that. Science fiction as social justice as science fiction. We're going to use science fiction as the lens today because, to be honest, I just taught a class on it. It's easier for me to still just stay in that mindset. But it doesn't mean that you only have to use science fiction as your kind of medium social justice. It can be in romance, it can be in fantasy, any genre. You can talk about social justice in those genres. Science fiction just works well for that at the moment because of a few different reasons, most of which it's easier for me to think about because it's what we've been doing. But science fiction at its core has been a what if genre. What if space travel to other planets was possible? What if teleportation were possible? What if advanced medicine led to immortality? All of that. It's a what if genre. The list goes on and on. And through it all, the genre asks how technology and science affects change on the world and into the future, right? How does this advancement change society, right? So if you're tracking with me, that technology, that science, how does that affect the world, right? Social justice, on the flip side of that, and social justice initiatives are also seeking change. They are asking, what if? What if we could affect change in the world to have more equity in healthcare, right? To have more equity in education and women's rights, all these things that you all are talking about, that you want to tackle, right? Those are social justice issues. They're asking, what if? And we're asking, as social justice writers, where can we blend the two together, right? Where can we blend the social justice with the science fiction, with our fiction in general, to make the politics, the world building, the characters, whatever. What can we do to make sure that the people who are reading this are seeing that on the page and seeing how the future could be different? Now, we ask questions through that of what has been that worked, or what has been that didn't work so well, right? A lot of fiction will look at, a lot of science fiction will look at, that's focused on race. We'll look at, well, this clearly didn't work in the past, but I'm laying that on top of something that's happening in the future, right? We're gonna use River Solomon's An Unkindness of Ghost text today as a really kind of an example for this, because it looks at antebellum South and racist issues, and it layers that, but it's set like thousands of years in the future. So looking at what didn't work so well, and how might that be different? What could be good or bad? We see this in utopian and dystopian science fiction all the time. where they're asking the question, well, what could be, and does that work or does that not as far as social justice goes? What should or shouldn't be? Asking that question of, and this is where you really start to brainstorm, right? And we say, okay, well, if this happens, should that happen? Shouldn't it happen? And really through those questions that we're asking in our literature and our fiction, we are offering commentary for our readers on a possibly more easy way to swallow, for people who don't necessarily want to go out there and read a text on X, Y, and Z issue, right? There are a lot of readers who aren't going to go out and find academic texts, or certainly not want to listen to the news, or read the websites for Black Lives Matters or for trans rights or anything like that. They don't want to go and do that, but maybe we can approach them. We can be an inroad for them to start learning about those issues through our fiction. And they don't even realize it sometimes, because we just, you're slipping it in there in more palatable, more digestible doses for them, right? All right. So a little bit of theory and stuff right there, but I really think it's important that you establish that we establish that we have power here, and that science fiction and social justice, they overlap really well. And so, yeah, that's what I wanted to say there. All right, so today we're going to talk about how we tackle social justice in three kind of major ways. One, the way we do our research and the research that we're doing for our books, right? No matter what you're doing, you're going to do some research, especially in science fiction. And so we're going to talk in that. We're going to talk about the world building that we do, how we actually set up the society, how we dig into all of the things that go into social justice, and how all of that affects the world that we're building for our stories. And the third one is characters, right? Because in the end, our readers oftentimes care about our characters. They don't necessarily care about the world that we've built. They care about the people that are in that world, that populate that world. And so that's where we'll end our kind of focus, and it'll come to a bit of a climax there. So, all right. I need to know more. We're going to talk about research in two parts, because I think there's just two different sides to this. One is the social justice themes that you want to address, right? You want to be able to pose, say, a critique of the prison industrial system by looking at a prison colony, a penal colony on another planet. Maybe that's your social justice idea. Or you want to do climate change, right? But you're going to do it in such a way that you're thinking about, well, maybe climate change on a planet we're terraforming with indigenous life already there. So maybe that's, maybe you're playing with that idea, but you're wanting to critique climate change on our own world, whatever it might be. The problem is you don't have any lived experience of that, right? None of us have ever been to another planet and terraformed the planet, or maybe we've not been to prison. Maybe you have. That's great if you can use that experience, but if you haven't, how do you get that experience? Because you don't want to tell it the wrong way. Chances are you're going out and you're doing some research, right? First thing most people are going to do, most writers these days are going to do, is go to the internet. We're going to start Googling and looking up stuff, statistics and all of that. It works, right? There's lots of really good information out there. You can learn really quickly, but sometimes there's too much information. You certainly don't want to rely on news outlets, because they are going to have their own biases that play into that. But that could also work in your favor if you're trying to use that in such a way in your story that you reflect how biased it is, and it's still biased in whatever story you're using, but don't use that as the truth within your story. If you really want to dig into good research on social justice themes and what it means to be either doing the fight for social justice, being oppressed by social justice, talk to people. If you were in my diversity session yesterday, I gave the same advice. I think it's good advice no matter what you're doing. I was in a different session we were talking about the disability communities. Same thing. Go talk to somebody, right? That is hands down the best thing that you can do. It works for a couple reasons, though, and I think this is why we recommend this as writers to each other so much. First, you're going to learn so much more from actually talking to people directly who are doing this kind of work. right? They want to talk about what they're doing because in their mind, they're getting their message out even more. And that becomes a partnership for you. They're also going to be able to answer your questions so you don't waste time down the rabbit hole of the internet, right? We all like to procrastinate our writing by doing research. This is a good way to be a little bit more expeditious about it, to be a little bit more. My mind is blanking on the word right now, but getting it done right and not wasting any time, right? So the other nice thing about talking to people, and this is the one that I think we don't always think about in our heads when we're especially when you're doing social justice research and talking to people who are doing who are actually doing the fight, right? Is that you're showing that you support them. And this is a little bit altruistic, but by showing that you support them, that can be really energizing for somebody who is out there constantly lobbying and protesting and raising awareness, right? By showing them that you're interested in what they're talking about, that you want to help, that can reinvigorate them to keep fighting and keep promoting whatever issue that it is that they're working on. And so I think it's a good thing. Why not help them in some way, right? Maybe you're not comfortable going out and protesting. Maybe you're not comfortable calling up the senators and all of that. That's okay, right? If you're not, that's not for everyone. But if you can in turn support them by doing this, then you're adding to that fight, but you're also showing them that it's important that they keep doing what they're doing, right? So the flip side of that, right? The other research we have to do is into whatever science fiction we're doing, right? If we are doing some kind of laser weapons or advanced medicine, spaceships, et cetera, whatever the advanced science is in your story, when you're writing for a social justice purpose, keep that at the front of your mind as you're doing your research, right? You want to make sure that you remember everything that I put into this story is going to affect the social justice theme in some way. Okay. You ask yourself, why is the science developing in such a way in your world? What's kind of the spur of it, right? How does that relate back to the social justice issue, right? If it is, let's say climate change, right? If I'm coming back to that one because it's right there at the top of the chat. If it's climate change, right, and we're doing some research, if there's tech of some kind, why did it develop and how does it affect the climate change? Because that's the issue we're talking about in the story. Or if it's healthcare, why is this advanced medicine being, kind of come to existence? How does that affect every aspect of the world? And how does it affect society? Who has access to it? We're going to talk a little bit deeper on this in just a few minutes, but who has access, right? Is it restricted to just one group of people? And that can play some role in the science and the social justice that you're doing. Okay. Whew. Zooming along. Again, if anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to post those in the chat. I've got the chat kind of here. That way I can pay attention to it. But okay. So once you've done your research, you've begun to get an idea of the world that you want to build, the social justice issues that you want to tackle. You still might have ideas for character, which is great. Let's hold on to those. I don't encourage getting into those just yet. Think about the world building, right? Because your characters are going to be a part of whatever world you build. They're going to be within that world, okay? As you're building the world, remember that your social justice themes should be present, right? In subtle and not so subtle ways. And make sure that they're present from start to finish. Everywhere that the characters look, they are seeing the way that social justice fits into their social structures, into their cultural norms, into the conflicts that they have with other characters, both friendly characters, maybe they're friends or family, but also the people who are the antagonists within your story. They're there. The social justice is playing a role in some way and form throughout the book, throughout the story. Maybe that social justice has affected the environment. And so that's playing on the way that they interact with the world around them, not just the people. So a little bit of an example here. So again, I said we're going to use rivers, Solomons, and unkindness of ghosts for a lot of this. So there's a lot of religious zealotry that goes into this. And so we see that throughout in the prayers that they're doing and who holds power structure on this generational ship. Maybe it also talks about issues of racism and inequalities therein, and violence around that. And from the first scene of the book, where you've got the main character Aster literally amputating a child's foot, because that child lives in the lower decks, the slums, and doesn't have access to the same medical treatments, which could have been just easily healed at the upper decks, to the interaction she has with guards and her own roommates. We see how the beliefs of this world, this kind of racist society, affects everyone. We see it affecting her, but we also see it affecting the powers of the world, right? Of this ship. It is present on every part of the page. And so if you want to do some recon on that and really look at how somebody is doing it, dig into that book. It's really good. I'll have some more resources at the end for books that'll work for you, if you want to do a little bit more. So, all right. Oh yeah, there I had a whole slide on it. So that's the back blurb for that. Fantastic book. Plot's a little shaky towards the end, in my opinion, but it covers so much and has such good stuff. Aster is also is neurodivergent. She is somewhere on the autism spectrum, and so that's really cool to see as a POV character, and bring some awareness to the kind of neurodivergent and equity as that relates to society. So that was a really cool experience too. Yeah, they're a great author. I recommend them highly. So this was her debut novel. She's got a few out now. All right. Moving right along. How are we doing on time? Okay, we're doing great. All right, so shifting to character now. Yeah, Carrie Lee, it was a great book. I absolutely love it. It was such a fun book to teach this past semester. So moving on from world building to character, I always make this shift for my own writing, because I believe that characters are a product of the world, right? I'm of the opinion that you can't design characters organically if you don't know what kind of world they're living in to begin with, right? They are, especially when we're talking about issues about race, about health, about economic status, all of that, they got to come from somewhere, and they've got to be built into the world organically. If you just say, I'm going to have this Latinx character be in my book, he's going to be a Latino, and I'm going to drop him into the story on this generational ship, but there are no other Mexicans on that ship, I'm going to be asking you, why do you have this character on that page without having anybody else, right? Like that, he has to come from somewhere. Unless he was like stored in cryo sleep or something, we need to know why. So having the world set first, then you can move into character. Yeah, products of the Lord Craft. Keep in mind how and what you want your readers to think about the characters, right? So the way that you describe your characters on the page, no matter where they are, what part of the society they're from, is going to influence the way your characters think about them, and in turn think about the real world. And we want our characters to create that emotional connection. We talk about this in writing of all kinds. It's just as important here, though. We want them to root for our main character, ideally. And so tying your main character to the social justice issue, if we care for the main character, we're going to inevitably care for what they care about. And so if they're caring about transgender rights, if they're caring about equality in healthcare, if they're caring about, I don't remember, if they're an adjunct professor, right, we're going to care that they're getting crapped on by the society around them. Okay. All right. So I tend to break down characters in social justice stories into 4 categories. And I think this tends to work pretty well if you include a good mixture of them. Now, if you go too heavy one way or the other, it gets a little problematic. But I break them down into 4 categories. One is the oppressed, right? These are usually the POV characters who are the oppressed. They are the ones that have the short end of the stick in a lot of ways, right? They're being exploited. They're being abused. They have lack of access to the resources that are present in the world. Whatever issue you're trying to discuss, it can be the most large world-changing views, right? It can be climate change, right? that the climate is changing and the sea levels are rising. Well, who's going to be impacted worst by that? Those people are falling into your oppressed group. Okay. A few things, though, I recommend keeping in mind when you're designing the oppressed characters. Make sure that your readers sympathize with them. We want them to feel the most connection there because they're the ones that we want to help in the real world, right? So if we want to help them in our books, we want to help them in the real world. Again, this connection point between emotion and what the characters are reading. For the oppressed, they and their situation, whatever the situation might be, should show that harsh reality of the world building you've done, right? So we want to put it on the page that they are getting the worst of it, and we're not just telling the reader this person has it bad. We're showing them through whatever settings that they're living in, whatever mindsets they're having, the kind of the fights that they're having to go through to show the inequalities of your world. And please, by all means, do not caricaturize these characters. Don't make them flat two-dimensional characters, because that's gonna make it almost like I've got to come in and save these people, which is not quite what we want to go with. We want to support them and help them. Okay. This is where talking to people who are in this fight or a part of whatever identities you're trying to address or who are doing the work, talk to them to get that real sense of authenticity, right? And Unkindness of Ghosts, coming back to that, the lower deckers, this second-class citizens, I'd even say third-class citizens because they're really down there. 3 of the 4 POV characters that we spend time with are a part of this group, and that's intentional, right? Because it shows us this world. We see their lives and the brutalities that they have to endure at every point on the page. So that's important. All right. The next are the people that I call the middle ground group. These are the ones who aren't necessarily negatively affected by whatever power structure you've established, or they don't necessarily, they're not being hurt, they're not being oppressed, they just exist. They also don't hold the power, though, so they're not at the top of the structure, they're not able to make big change, but they exist within the world. These are they're living their lives. As long as it doesn't affect them, they don't care, right? And we see this in the world today. It's a unique group for you as a writer, because they can be swayed one way or the other. They can be brought over to help out in the fight for social justice in your story, or they can be brought over to the power side and the oppressor's side, which we'll talk about here in a second, and be part of the problem at that point, right? I recommend having some of these characters, right? Because this is also another access point for readers. Maybe the reader that you're trying to address has never even heard about the issue that you're wanting to talk about, right? And so this is their entry point into the story to say, that's me, but I would rather be able to help. And so I want to go over there and help whatever the POV character is within the society, right? So having some middle ground folks is good. Then moving on to the oppressors. This is the third group on the opposite side of the oppressed, and they're oftentimes the antagonists in the story, and they hold the power. Got to dig in here. Got to give them much more life. Don't leave them two-dimensional either, right? We want a good villain that we hate. We want them to be brutal. We want them to play an active role in creating whatever inequalities of the world. You want them to interact with your oppressed POV character, because then we'll see the kind of conflict and tension that is there. Let them hurt your POV character. That's okay. It can be a little taxing to write that kind of story, but it's good to have those characters on the page, right? Get in their head, understand why they're doing what they do, how they justify it to themselves, that they are in the right. Unkindness of Ghost does this well with the Sovereign and the guards, but I actually think there's a better text that does this, and this is Kindred by Octavia Butler. If you haven't read that, it's a phenomenal book as well. The oppressor in that book is Rufus. He is a white slave owner, and he literally justifies everything that he does in such a manipulative but rational way that it brings the main character kind of over to his side, which is kind of a strange thing. And even Dana feels nasty about it, that she actually understands him and wants and understands why he's doing what he does, right? And because of that, it makes him all the more terrifying, and it really punches home the fact of the inequalities within the society, right? So as you're writing, I mean, yeah, Butler's fantastic. I just saw the chat there. Yeah, she's great. I would read her every day if I could. So when you're writing your oppressors, ask yourself, how do I build them in such a way that they make the world work, right? That they punch home everything that you're trying to say from the negative side, right? That they're, how are they rationalizing it? How are they maintaining power? What will they do to hold on to that power? Because that's also a really important thing. All right, the fourth one, which is a fun one to play around with, are your reformed oppressors. These are those people who have the power, who either held it before the story began and gave it up, or hold it at the beginning, maybe do some bad stuff, but then they shift and they change and realize the error of their ways, right? The things that they're doing wrong. They've decided to use their power within society to positively impact the social justice theme. These are good folks to have because they're good allies for your oppressed. Now, the thing you want to be careful with, I think, with these characters is that you don't want them to come in and be the savior, right? We see this a lot of the times, that this is in racial stories where this is the white savior that comes in and saves the day. We don't want that. We want these characters to instead use their power and their privilege within whatever world you've built to support the POV character, the oppressed people, to evoke that change for themselves, right? I'm helping you, I'm giving my power over to you, so that way you can make the changes within the world, right? Coming back to An Unkindness of Ghosts again, the Surgeon General, our main kind of male character that's a good guy, he is the number 2 on the ship. He has the second most power of anyone around. And because of that, he is able, as he begins to feel for Aster, the POV character, they actually end up developing a bit of a romantic interest, but it's a strained one. As they begin to feel, he begins to feel, he is able to decide to help her, right? He is able to give her passes to be able to go around the ship and get access to areas she wouldn't necessarily have access to because of her status on the ship as one of the lower deck folks, as the oppressed, right? And so the hope in these characters, these reformed oppressors, is that you'll have readers, hopefully, who hold power in the real world, who really have the ability to evoke some real change as it relates to whatever social justice issue you're trying to affect and comment on. And that maybe through seeing how these reformed oppressors are able to change in the story, they can see, I can help too by doing X, Y, Z, right? Makes sense? I hope so. All right. Wrong screen again. All right. Talk a little bit about plot. I know I said 3 big things. Plot is kind of there, and I want to just make a couple brief comments about it. You can choose to directly address the social justice theme in your plot, right? Maybe the whole point of the plot is to tear down the racist and unjust society that exists in the world, right? Or maybe you want to be a little bit more subtle in it and just have some things existing in the background, right? I encourage you to go ahead and dive deep into it, at least to start. See what happens. You can also include other things on the periphery. But whatever you do, make sure that the character is present throughout the story. This is where you kind of have to walk the line between a character-driven story and a plot-driven story, because we want the characters, we want to care for them and see how they're affecting that plot just as much, right? All right. Again, that goal is to connect your reader throughout the whole piece. We want them to be there. We want them to be present and to be a part of the adventure and the story that we're telling. All right. So a few final thoughts. One is intentionality. When you want to address a social justice issue in a story, in a text, you have to be very intentional about everything that you're putting on the page. It has to work in such a way as to help promote or critique the world around you, right? Think about what you're choosing to incorporate in terms of setting details, in terms of the words that you're using, in terms of the characters who are in existence and the diversity that comes around from them, whatever that diversity might mean, right? So be very intentional about what you're putting on the page. Have somebody read it, make it better. Try to avoid heavy-handedness. So don't come out right out and say this is wrong and we're going to address it and all of that. It's a balancing act, just like description, info dumps, everything that we talk about as writers for the craft side of things. This is just another added layer of that, right? In early drafts, you try to balance it as best you can. You want to make sure that the story is still coming through, the plot is still coming through, but you're also still making points about social justice. And this is really where having somebody outside of the story, outside of the social justice issue altogether, read it, right? Maybe have another author read it and see what they think, right? Yeah. Balance, I said that already. And accept the reality that you're going to make some mistakes in this social justice endeavor, right? Everyone does. Even those fighting for social justice in the real world make mistakes in the approaches that they take. So understand that you're going to make mistakes in the way you portray people and the way you portray the issue. This is where it comes back to that research thing and who you're talking to. Have them read it and see, did I do it right? And does it make sense? Recommended reading. This is my book list from the class that I just taught. I highly recommend each and every one of these books because they talk about a different type of social justice, and they're handled really well. Octavia's Brood, in particular, is an anthology of short stories that covers literally everything. There are so many, and most of the stories in Octavia's Brood are actually written by social justice fighters. Some of them have never written a story in their life, and honestly, it comes through a little bit in the writing, but it's still really good because it's bringing awareness. Yes, Broken Earth series is fantastic. A lot of social justice in there, but yeah, highly recommend all of these books. Very different, all of them, and yeah, I can't say enough. I recommend that. So. All right, I'm going to open it up for questions at this point. Questions, thoughts, please feel free to share your screen. We can have a little bit of a discussion here in the last kind of 10 minutes. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. How do I do that? There we go. So yeah, jump in, unmute yourself, whatever you want to do. I'd love to hear from you. The last book is Lunar Braceros 2125 2148. Here, I'll type it here. And that's a really good one. It talks about the Latin American experience in 2100s because it's they're using Latin American folks to basically take care of radiation and radioactive waste on the moon, and so. It's a really interesting text. Very different, very high concept. No worries, Kenya. Any thoughts or questions that you all have? Like I said, I'd love for you to unmute if you feel comfortable unmuting. What are some social issues that you think we need more of? That's a really good question. We're getting a lot of I think a lot of race is being talked about. I think we can do more in all of these, right? The fact that there's still social justice issues means that we should be doing more writing about them. I'd like to see, especially in science fiction, I'd like to see LGBTQ issues addressed more than it's being addressed right now, and kind of everything relating around that. Because to be honest, when I was prepping this class, I wanted to include something, and there was so little. And Unkindness of Ghosts kind of touches into that because there's some gender fluidity that's happening. But yeah. Hey, Carol, how are you?
Good, thanks. I am really awake after last night. Yeah.
Good.
I had two thoughts or questions. One is,
Yeah.
what do you feel about presenting some of these ideas as just a minor thread in your story, or keeping it present in everything, as opposed to this is a story about
Yeah.
social justice?
Yeah. I
How do
think
you
it's
approach that?
great. Yeah. I think it's great to do that, in all honesty. I think having that be present, but not the focal point, can work. Um, and maybe that's a little bit easier way for some folks to get into the story and to get into the social justice, right? And so having it on the periphery is good. I think I was just trying to focus today on really making that
Yeah,
the
yeah,
focus
yeah.
of the story. But I think it's great, and there are great books that do it. Um, like I said, an unkindness of ghosts really does focus on kind of race and inequality that way. But the gender fluidity is there; it's just not addressed directly. It exists in the background, and so you can oftentimes have your main issue and some kind of side issues that work as well.
Mm-hmm. And then thank you. And my second question is, of course, you made a good point about doing the research and finding out what you're talking about and talking to people, but there is a very strong focus these days about the correct voice for a story. And do I
Yeah,
have the right to talk about something that I'm a middle-aged white lady living in the suburbs, so
yeah,
there's some things that I'm going to have to be very careful about. Could you
yeah.
talk about that a little bit, please? And
Yeah, absolutely. So I had this conversation with some students this past semester. I had one student who was a white woman who was like, I want to talk about race. How can I do that? Right. And it's not all about necessarily you taking that voice, but instead maybe your main character isn't the oppressed person. Maybe it is someone who is aiding the oppressed, right? And who is there to be present. Um, I think including whatever issue it is that you're not necessarily feeling comfortable talking about, and you don't want to take anyone else's voice, but talking about it in a way that you can still help people who want to help those people, right? You can still show people that here's how you can do it and help them. I think that's a good way to do it as well. Does that answer your question? I hope.
it does. Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And yeah, Kenya says it really well there. White women can still talk about race for sure. Um, because you still have a lived experience about folks of different race or of different identities than you, right? And your perception, your interaction with them, I think that's where your focus ends up being, rather than I'm going to tell their story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just want to give a shout out to a friend of mine, Stephen Van Patten, who is a Black man living in Brooklyn, but most of his stories have a very clear thread about racial injustice. And, he's very cool. You can find
That's
him
awesome.
at Laughing Black Vampire.
Okay.
Yeah.
Post a link to him if you can in the chat, because I'd love to check it out. Let's see. I use Samira Ahmed's internment in class, and it's great. Okay, cool. I'm assuming it has something to do with maybe immigration and internment camps, but I want to look more into that one as well. Hey, Sally.
Oh, I forgot I have tape over my camera. Okay, I've been wanting, I don't know if this entirely applies, but I've been wanting to write a story about a society that is free from religion. It's like a utopia, and I can't figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, if everything is good and it's a utopia and everyone has agreed to do this, what's the conflict?
That's really the struggle with utopias, right? And
Yeah.
as when I teach science fiction courses, we talk about utopia and dystopia, right? Because they're often the opposite ends of the spectrum.
Right.
And when you read utopias, yeah, that's really what I'm getting to, Donna. Absolutely. When you read a utopia, it's a utopia for some. It is never going to be a utopia for all.
That's good, Donna.
Right. And so it looks like a utopia at surface level, right? When you first get into the story, it looks gorgeous. Everything is great until someone else shows up. Some other shows up, and that's what kind of throws everything out of whack. And so maybe your utopia is that religion is gone away for until you start to dig in a little deeper and you see that people are maybe still practicing their religions privately. And then that sparks up the powder keg or something, right? And so I hope that would help a little bit, is just to have it there on the front end that you're making this comment, but then throw it out of whack.
I thought of maybe a time traveler coming in and
Yeah.
experiencing this culture. It just seems really hard to do, but
No, for
something
sure.
I've been thinking about for a long time.
Yeah, whatever the monkey wrench is that gets thrown into the issue needs to be explosive, right? So if it is a time traveler, right, they show up and maybe there's a religious revolution and suddenly religions goes through the roof, and so you crash and you destroy that utopia.
Yeah. Okay, well okay, thanks so much.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Kristopher.
You are more than welcome. Let's see here. Ada Hoffman's The Outside. Excellent.
Trying to leave.
I'm loving these recommendations, and I'm always looking for more recommendations for books and classes. So I will be checking out all of these. Any other questions or thoughts or? I'm gonna hang out here. So if anyone has anything, as I scribble down author names. Any issues that should not be addressed? Not really. I think there's a lot of social justice issues that I think are out there that should be addressed. Not to touch it. Again, my guess for not being told not to touch it is that they don't. Again, you don't want to take someone else's voice, right? And so that would be my encouragement. There is maybe you don't take on that story, but maybe you mentor someone who does. Maybe you mentor a young writer who is interested in that. That's one of the reasons I love teaching, right? Because I get to see students who are from different walks who want to address social justice issues that they're passionate about, that they have a voice in, that I can't touch, right? Hey, Sally.
Hi. I thought of something else.
Yeah.
Okay, in wanting to write trans characters.
Yeah.
Here's my conflict. It's like that has to be the center of the story. It can't be just like a trans person who's a detective, trans person who's a teacher, and something else happens. That's why I always kind of struggle with that. It's like I feel like that has to be the center of the story, or does it? I don't know.
I don't know that has to be the center, right? I think if we're trying to normalize this in our society, right, which is one of the main issues, right? This is a normal thing. Let's move on.
Right.
I think we do that, right? As writers, that's an element of their identity, just like them being black or brown or poor or rich or neurodivergent, right? It's a part of their identity that they live with, that they believe in and they feel, and they move on. This is where I think we start digging into kind of diversity issues, right? And diversity in our fiction is that we want to have those present, but we want to tell them in such a way that it's normal for the world.
Yeah.
And so I think having that, the really important thing when you're trying to do that is going to be, if you don't identify from that background, right, is to make sure that people who do are reading the work as you're making it. You're using the right terminology. You're not being offensive in any way, because some of the simplest things that you can put on the page that you wouldn't necessarily think of are unconsciously a problem, right? Subconsciously a problem. So I think just talking with them, but making it in such a way that it's normal for the society, or normal for this character.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kristopher. Okay,
You're more than welcome. Let's see. I've always found this. I'm reading through the comments here now. Oh. Interesting. Yeah. I think young adult might do a better job of addressing those issues, because again, oftentimes the POV characters are those characters who are younger. See, this is great. This is good information here. Thanks, Anna, for sharing that website. Y'all are great. This is good stuff. Like I said, in the end, as long as you are intentionally thinking about it and not just saying, "Oh, that's a great idea, I'm going to write it," but you're putting in the effort, the thought on the front end to address it, to think about it, to make a decision on how am I going to address it? Am I doing my research, talking through it, and understanding it? I think that's gonna work great. About hiring sensitivity readers, that's a good idea if you have the income to do that. My honestly, when I've written some stuff that isn't my identity, um, and I'm curious about how is this going to come across. I've often done, like I said, I've done my research. I've talked to people who do have that identity, and I ask them, would you be interested and willing to read this the way I make sure I get it right? And most of the time, they're like, yeah, please. And they're not necessarily writers, um, but they enjoy reading. They enjoy the stories, and so that's my first layer. To be honest, I don't have the money to hire somebody, and so. But I think if you can do that, especially if you're hiring somebody who's a little bit more um, engaged with, with who has a background in writing, but also would be able to edit for that and all that. That's really nice. But yeah, I don't think you have to do that by any means. I think getting to know people and getting to hear them and um, but also making sure that they're okay to tell you that this is wrong. You did this wrong. You did this. This could be better. That's a better way to go. Then you can shout them out in the announcements or in the acknowledgments at the end, and they feel really special about that. Would college nurses be helpful with research, for example, connecting with the school's disability services office, see if any of the students would like to read and offer thoughts and ideas? That's a great idea. Absolutely. Um, I work with at the university. I work with our National Society of Black Engineers, and so I'm the advisor for the group. And so if I'm writing about a Black engineer, I'm going to go talk to them and see if anybody in there would like to read it. Um, and so I think, yeah, talking to the Disability Services Office or Disability Resources, what we call it here, and seeing if they could find somebody is a great way. Yeah, reach out. They might, staff members might be a little hesitant just to connect an outside person with resources on campus, but there are definitely ways for you to kind of get engaged and yeah. How do you avoid making the issue seem heavy-handed? That's a tough question to answer, and I kind of poked at it for a second there at the end of the presentation, but um, it's going to come down to balance, right? It's coming down to subtly having things exist in the background. That those are the things that literary people talk about. Oh, this is a symbol for this or that. It's in the background. Um, you can also have it more forefront, have the issue being constantly addressed. Um, but I think as long as you avoid kind of repetition, like the same thing is happening over and over and over, and it starts to get boring, that starts to feel heavy-handed. Um, Avoid being too on the nose in terms of dialogue, like, this climate change is awful and we need to make a difference, right? That campy kind of hokey dialogue. I think, again, if you start big, make it organic within the system of the world, whatever the social justice issue is, and then make sure that the characters who exist in it feel like they're organically a part of it, then yeah. Absolutely, Anna. Right. As you know, Bob, climate change is bad. Right. We don't want that. And Anna did a great, I think, Anna, didn't you do the presentation on theme? I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. And so I think that could, I think that goes hand in hand. Absolutely. No, Johnny did the one on theme. That's right. I'm probably just thinking back to our world building panel. All right, folks, we're just about out of time. Any last questions or thoughts? Yeah, I feel that. Well, thank you all for being so engaged, and this has been a lot of fun. If you have any questions at all, please don't ever hesitate to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to chat about anything. Let me see if I can do that. There's my email. I will answer any questions and talk till the sun goes down. So have a great one. We're on the last day of the conference. Hopefully we can make it through till the end. So.